Hey everybody, Ragnarok here, back with game 2 out of 6 from the US Amateur East Tournament I played a few weeks ago. And as promised, this game also features the King's Indian, where I played as black. Now the King's Indian, just to jump into the first two moves, occurs when white pushes d4, which is more common, I believe the higher rated players, because most people start off with e4. So if you're unsure how to play against d4, I recommend the King's Indian because the first few moves are really very much the same. So just to go through a first few moves here, c4 is the second move. You want to go with your knight first. That kind of opens up that you're playing the King's Indian, and then g6. And then no matter what your opponent does, knight c3 was played at this point, your bishop is going to come to g7, and all of these pieces are pretty much able to move without your opponent intruding on them. The only exception would be, which he doesn't do here, I'll go off script, is if you played e4. Now e4 is threatening e5, which would push your knight away from this square. So at this point, you do want to break and you want to push d6. And d6 is strong because it blocks, it helps with the promotion of e5, but it also blocks this pawn from coming in. And you'll notice you're giving your opponent a nice strong center here, but that's okay because with the King's Indian, you're intending to attack it eventually, not necessarily outright like most openings. And I kind of like it because it's a little quiet that way, but as soon as you can get these pawns to move away, like if you could provoke d5, which I talk about in this opening, this bishop becomes such a strong attacker on this knight, this rook, and this b-pawn kind of is struggling to move, and if it does, then your bishop can open up and attack, wreak havoc later on. So back to the main line, he played knight f3 instead, so I can safely castle in this situation. So he does play e4, d6 must be played like I mentioned, and this is where he goes a little bit off. I believe my opponent's rating was 1300. Most people will play bishop to e2, kind of getting ready for pushing your pawns, kind of waiting to see what black does. But in this situation, he played bishop to d3, and that kind of threw me off a little bit. The main confusion I have with it is that whenever you have your opponent fianchetto, you don't generally want to put your bishop on the same diagonal as it, at least the pawn. It'd be kind of like if I were to put my bishop here, or sorry, my bishop right here on e6, and then my opponent plays a fianchetto, where the pawn is on b3. Because my bishop's never really going to attack the weak square, which would be this in this scenario. Because if this weren't here, yes, the bishop would have a nice eye on the h7 square. The queen could eventually maybe come out here, the knight would come out, and a lot of these pieces naturally attack the h7 square. However, with the fianchetto, yes, you do create some weaknesses around your king, but this bishop's not really going to penetrate anything. So I was a little confused by that move. My main goal, as you saw in the last game, is really to play knight a6. And this is kind of a scenario where you shouldn't just go by the book, and that's really what I was doing, which is my mistake in this game. I do end up winning this game, but I definitely could have played a lot better, I believe. So I go knight a6, and it is kind of weird because this bishop, when it's on e2, can't actually come over to the square to help defend against this knight coming in. But in this scenario, because he went to d3, he actually can. He can come back here and really just kind of prevent this knight from doing anything. So always kind of analyze your opponent's moves, and if they do something off the book line, don't just follow the book like I did in this mistake. So that was my mistake for sure. But if we just continue with the way the game went, he went with a3, limiting my knight's movements, and if you notice, my knight can't move at all right now, except back to its starting square, which is really not going to help me out. So a really good job for him. So I just continue to push forward here with e5, which is the main idea, the main line. So if he were to take here, I can take back, and we're just kind of going to open up the diagonal here. I wouldn't actually lose a pawn if he does take, let's just say, see what happens. He could eventually take here. Now normally when this bishop's not here, I could take back. I actually think I still can do it right now. So if I take here, yeah, it works fine. Let's just say his bishop takes back. It doesn't matter the bishop or the knight. I can take back here. Material is even, 6 pawns to 6 pawns. I do maintain my dark square bishop, but things are more open. The problem with a lot of times I'll back up to the position where it's a little bit more closed, actually after he pushes d5. So when this position is closed, and what I mean by closed is when these pawns are blockading these pawns, nothing's going to move anywhere. this bishop can't go where it wants to be. So my ultimate goal, and this is a common line, I'm kind of breaking up this this center, strong center that white has, forcing him to come forward or trade pawns. As you saw, he decided to push forward. And then my goal is really to move this knight out of the way and then push f5. We saw the same idea in my last video, and that's a common theme in the King's Indian. So here he pushed d5. I decided to try to break up the center a little bit if I can, c3, c6, also giving my knight a little outpost if needed, because if he takes back here, my knight could go to c7, hop over here, and potentially have a nice square, maybe d4, maybe c5, or even I could jump in here right now. But the problem is this pawn could kick me away, potentially. So that's kind of the ideas I'm thinking. If we back up, let me see. Because he's here, I might actually be able to come here right now. This might be pretty strong, actually, now that I'm looking at it. Because if he does push here, I can trade. But then again, do I really want to? I mean, that's kind of a bad bishop. He can't really go past his pawns. And I'm trading a knight that could potentially be active. And look at his pawn structure. It's really good. So maybe that's not really the best bet for me. So if we go back, he just castles, which is pretty normal again. My knight comes backwards. Now, the main reason I did this here was because I want to push f5. He pushes b4 now, and I push f5 anyway, which is not really the best move, as you can see by the engine. I really should have taken this pawn here, kind of opening myself up a little prematurely, and now if he takes back, which I don't believe, no, he doesn't, and I take back here, actually, this is kind of what I'm going for. Yes, my king is open, but there's not really too much that can come over this way. This knight can swing back here. This knight eventually could hop as well to these 4 squares and kind of get more into the game. I'm trying to open up more attacks on his king side. That's really the goal. So instead, he brought his knight in here to g5. So let's look at this position here. It's still kind of a little volatile, I guess I would say. He has a nice pawn structure, a little advanced on the d5 pawn. His knight, I think, is probably not the best place for it there. But the reason he went there is because he's eyeing this e6 square. If he can get into the e6 square, he's got a nice fork on my rook and queen, which is why I have to move my knight over here. But just backing up and looking at the position again, the center is not really solidified, because at any time he could, he could take my c6 pawn and then potentially bring his queen here, have a nice discover attack because he'll be on the same file as my king. And that's kind of the risk that you get when you play f5 in the King's Indian. So it could potentially happen. So first things first, I have to make sure I can block this square. If he does come here, I'm willing to trade my bad bishop off because it's not going to do anything in most times of the King's Indian. And if he trades, I'm eventually going to get this pawn. Maybe not right away. I'm not sure if that's the best move looking at it. It looks okay. Maybe he takes here. Yeah, maybe not right away, but I absolutely could. So maybe in this instance, I might, queen goes back. I might push pawn first because this is hanging. I mean, there's no white bishop anymore. This knight can't protect this pawn. There's no need to rush to get that. It's way too far advanced, and I'll go up a pawn, which is nice. And then this pawn structure looks pretty good once I start pushing these 2 pawns forward onto his king. So that's the idea, the scenario, and that's why he can't take there right away. So instead, he takes here on c6 with his d pawn. I take back. I'm trying to solidify my pawn structure. So I can't quite push here yet. I'd love to have this pawn actually on d4, because then I'd have a really nice pawn, I guess, tsunami coming towards him, which is really nice when you connect all those pieces together. Meanwhile, he has 2 different pawn islands, meaning that they're blocked off by the d file here. So he does push, and I think that, again, my goal really to get here, I don't mind that. So I just push my d5 pawn. There's really no threat right now of him taking my knight because he'd be giving up a pretty strong bishop, as there's it's going to be needed, I believe, and just kind of allowing me to have this file. So he's not going to want to do that. But instead, so when I pushed the pawn, he took with his d pawn, and I don't mind, or his e pawn, and I don't mind that because, again, this pawn structure is very good. I can take back. I probably should have taken back with my pawn, if you look at the nice island that we have going here. I don't see any huge drawbacks to that. And why didn't I do that? Heat of the moment, maybe. But I think my main idea was really just to take here, kind of open this square up. I think that was the main goal. However, he does have this now. So again, the main issue that I have is this file has opened up, this diagonal. So all he has to do is get his bishop and his queen on both c4 and b5, b3. And if he can do that, he's got a lot more pressure on this knight. This knight can't move right now because it's pinned already by the bishop. Again, that's why he didn't want to take my knight. So my main goal is I have to get this knight out of here, because if I move my king right away, I believe he can just start taking. He's got 3 attackers, and I've only got 2 defenders. So in general, you want to have the same amount of defenders as they have attackers, and then you'll be okay. So if I can get another piece to defend this, I would be good. So I can't waste time moving my king yet. So first, I bring my knight into the game. He defends my knight. The best move really for him was to go back to f6. I believe if he did that, this is not a huge threat. You might think right away it is, but again, this knight can't move. He blocks with, I believe, knight just comes in right here. And this is fine. It's plugging up the hole that the bishop has. Meanwhile, my knight can't take. Otherwise, I would absolutely take that right now. I'd probably have to move my king, and then he can probably just make sure he's safe. So that would be pretty good for him, I think. But in this game, he actually brought his queen to b3, which again makes sense. I mean, there's, sometimes there's great moves and sometimes there's better moves. So his knight, obviously, going back here would have been good in hindsight. But at the same point, when he did, I saw him, I was thinking of this move as well. And actually analyzed the game with him afterwards. He was thinking it too, but he didn't like this pawn push either. It just turns out that it actually was the right move, which happens sometimes. You may see it in the game, you might not think it's the best move. But this does look good as well. I mean, he still has 3 attackers, so nothing's changed about what pieces are attacking it. However, he has now opened up that his rook can come in here and attack this knight as well. And the only other defender I can put is my bishop, but first I have to kick this knight away. So I do push the knight away. And again, this is what we talked about. He should have gone to f6 in this scenario. But the problem with his knight going to h3 is that it can't move anywhere. And this becomes a critical scenario. So while I haven't secured a huge advantage just yet, as long as I can keep this knight at bay, that's really my main goal. All I have to do is attack it, possibly by bringing this pawn up 2 squares if I can. So first I move my king, now that I actually can, because I've still got enough defenders here. He brings his bishop, which is a nice move, I believe, because it's uniting his rooks together. I still have to move my bishop off the back rank. Maybe he could have played rook d1 here instead, just to try to get that other defender, but I think I would have been fine bringing my bishop here instead. It would have been okay. So game continues. Here's a big mistake I made. I know I was planning f4, but for some reason I felt like this knight was going to become a crutch, and once his rook came here, it was going to be lost, I thought. So I took his knight. Big mistake, because I have a very active piece in the center of the board, and I'm now opening up his bishop and queen, because now I can't push this pawn, not that I would at this scenario, because of checkmate. So he's got some ideas coming because he took with the queen. I think bishop probably would have been better, just because my main goal is to go after this knight, I believe. So he does take with queen instead. I push f4. Now why f4? Because I could potentially take this bishop soon. Not yet, but if I can bring my queen over to a4, h4, sorry, the board's flipped on me. I'm trying to get better at that. Then I'll have more attackers on there, and this knight can't go anywhere. So he brings his a rook over to d1, which is good. I don't think that's bad. I don't think it really matters which rook he's bringing. As you can see, the engine is pointing out this move could be good as well. Having both rooks here in a nice centralized position would be good. So that's kind of why you want to decide on this one. And just as a side note, when you're choosing which rooks, just if we back up and he did go with this one, just kind of think, where's this rook going to go? Let's say I do a bad move. He can't come over and jump over this rook. He's not going to do anything on these files. So you want to think about the better structure, which in this case would be bringing this rook here. So I bring my queen here to have a nice double attack on this knight. He brings his rook, and this was a scary move actually. I was kind of thinking of some mistakes. I thought I made a mistake here, and turned out to be okay because his idea is he's eyeing this pawn. I don't want to give up a pawn. This pawn can't move. He could potentially take this pawn. I'm kind of like, what can I do? I can't defend both pawns. So I have to continue with my attack. So I have a really good move here. So take a second, pause it if you'd like, and kind of see how I can continue putting pressure on that knight. All right, so let's see if you saw it. So the way to put pressure on the knight is actually indirect. It's more so to remove this defender because there's two defenders on the knight. I've got two attackers. So all I have to do is block one or take the other one out. So I decided to block one with f3. And that's strong because if he takes either one of these pawns, I'm going to take this pawn, attacking his rook so it has to move away. Meanwhile, I've got two attackers on his knight. So that's what happened here. His rook did take this pawn, which kind of defends here because he takes here, and now he doesn't have to take back with his king, which creates a weird open king scenario. So he takes back with the rook, and now I take back with the queen because I want to have some more alleviation of this pressure. So we traded pawns. He got my g6 pawn, I got his g2 pawn, but I'm up a complete knight. So because I knew I was taking the knight, I didn't want to take with the rook right away because I believe there's a lot of nice sacrifices here. Let's just play out the ideas. I think that removes my defender. I don't necessarily have to take right away, but it's, if I take this, he's got some ideas coming in here with some nasty discoveries. I really don't want to be caught with that because I don't believe this is checkmate. Yeah, it's not. I can't check him because if I check him anywhere, the rook comes back and now he has to discover attack on me. So I saw a lot of this. I knew when I took the knight, I didn't want to take with the bishop because that's just scary. And just to play it out, if he did take here and I take his rook back, I believe this has a nice attack on his knight. He can bring the rook if he wants, but I've got to block this first. So I can't block really. I can't block with either piece. So if I block with queen, he has check again, and now this bishop is getting my queen. So that's just really, really nasty. I don't want to play around with a lot of that. It looks really bad for me. I'm completely open, both of these bishops on a nice diagonal on my king. So what did happen? Let's go back a few moves. So I took with queen. If he did take, now this is just very bad for him. Same idea, except now the queen's not on the board. He could potentially do this, but no, in this scenario, I think I would probably play it out this way. He has to save his rook, and I'm able to save my knight, and he's got, his king can't go anywhere. So this is a little better with the queen off the board. I think material's about even. I'm down 2 pawns, but I've got some nice ideas maybe here, potentially checking him. I'm not even sure I'd want to play this as black. I think it's just better that maybe it would have been okay for him to take, but he takes, he moves the rook. Sorry, he moves the rook here first. Engine is suggesting that this queen trade, let's just play what that is. I thought this was pretty cool too, because if I take his queen, he takes back with check, and then I believe it's either mate or almost mate. Let's see, check. Is it? Now we can win material with this queen, or at least get our queen back. But is there a tactic here? What wins the game? Let's see. Double check is always nice. I'm wondering if there's a combination that wins. Either that or it's just a draw. I'm not sure if he can win here. I mean, he might be able to get material, maybe get the queen eventually. Because in this scenario, I mean, he could come back here and get the queen, but I'm not sure if it works out. At the least, it's a draw, which I wouldn't want it to be. So I think it's suggesting, since he's down a knight, to play for a draw. So I come here, kind of defending this pawn, so at least when we trade, it would be a rook for both a bishop and knight and a pawn, which is okay in my book at this point, but he moves his king over. Now just blocking off, attacking his queen, blocking the bishop, so my king has some movement. Double attack here. I'm not sure that's the best move. His idea really is just to put more pressure on here. If I do nothing, he's going to win material. Tempo on the queen, or on the rook. So go back, let's see. I just block here. I'm just really developing now. He kind of missed his chance with those whole sacrifices. It's not really relevant anymore because of my knight move. And then I'm just really ahead at this point. I'm up an entire knight. And I think a knight to a pawn, yeah. So here I have to be a little careful because he comes in here. Now if I just let's see. If I move my knight somewhere else, let's just say, he's got checkmate. Well, not checkmate, but really bad. So I have to worry about that. So I have to be careful because I also can't take here. I could even bring my king up probably too. But the best move really is just to not worry about any checkmate. Just defend this pawn. And then at this point, just a blunder at this point. He played really well up to this point, but drops his rook. So we'll play out the last few moves because, well, he drops a rook and he just gets a pawn back. There's no pin at this point. So he's given up his rook for a bishop and a pawn. Not the best trade. Check. I get his bishop. So now I've got my bishop back. I'm up an entire rook plus a knight. Check. A little scary, a little dangerous, but I've got enough pieces to block. Pawn takes, again, his final threat, really just coming in here, kind of forcing some draw ideas. I take his bishop, try to remove what I can. Block. I could have blocked with queen as well. Just trying to get more pieces in the way. If he checks now, I can just take the pawn. No big issues there. Check. He has to go back and block. I'm threatening to bring my rook over here for, well, I would win the queen and then checkmate. We can kind of show you just what that looks like. Oh, no, I actually can't do that first. I think I was just trying to trade queens. Never mind, because my rook is pinned. So then he blocks here. Check, trying to trade queens again. And then he kind of forgot, dropped the queen. So yeah, really, really good opening to that game. Kind of got a little bit easier at the end as pieces started dropping. It wasn't really in time pressure, but really, really, I enjoyed that game. I thought I had a lot to learn from it myself. Don't just jump into, bishop a6 is a line I know from King's Indian, and I just did it because I'm kind of getting used to the opening. So my suggestion is go out, play more games, play more consistently, more of the same openings over and over, and you'll learn what to do and what not to do. And this was a good example of seeing your opponent did what not to do, but still turned into a really close game. And at a lot of different chances, there was opportunities for him to checkmate me, but I still felt pretty good throughout the game. Definitely a lot of critiques and mistakes I made along the way, but that's chess and that's how we learn. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys are enjoying learning with me as I continue to climb the ladder in chess. Make sure to subscribe. You can just hit that button down here, that way, I think it is, on the bottom right of your screen. And subscribe, it really helped me out. Let me know that you guys are interested in my videos. So I've got 2 more videos to do. One is going to be the French defense I played against, and then the other one is a normal e4, e5 game, the Italian game. That was the one game that I lost against the 2100. So I'll probably do the 2100 game next week, and then the French defense the week after that. So please subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.